at our first and much anticipated afternoon keynote, welcoming two Winspirational Award-winning writers to the stage. For anyone who I haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name is Kirsty McQuarrie. I'm Sector Development Manager for CILIPS and lead for our programme of feminism for libraries and librarians. And the wonderful women beside me, they really need no introduction, but if they'll indulge me, I can't resist celebrating them anyway. So Sara Sheridan is a writer and activist with a particular interest in female history, who's written more than 20 books. And watch this space because more are in the works. And I couldn't fit them onto one slide, try as I might, so you can see a choice selection behind us there. Amongst many other honours, Sara has received a Scottish Library Award, been shortlisted for the Saltire Awards and the Wilbur Smith Prize, and her 2022 novel, The Fair Botanists, I have 2 copies floating around the delegate body, was justly chosen as Waterstones Scottish Book of the Year. Sara also contributes to the sector by mentoring fledgling writers like myself, and she sat on the board of several writers' organisations. We are equally honoured to be joined by Eleanor Thom, a writer of fiction and creative non-fiction whose work often focuses on migration, social history and remembrance. Eleanor's first novel, The Tin Can, about 3 generations of Scottish travellers, and is especially appropriate read in June, as it's Gypsy, Roma and Traveller History Month. The novel won the New Writer Ventures Award for Fiction and the Saltire First Book of the Year Award, with Eleanor also being featured on TV's The Culture Show as one of the year's best new novels. Eleanor's second novel, Connective Tissue, based on the life of her grandmother, a Holocaust refugee from Berlin, was published by Taproot Press in 2023, and she's one of the Genesis Jewish Book Week's emerging writers for non-fiction. For 5 years, Eleanor has also been a community writer in residence for the Edinburgh International Book Festival's Citizens Project, recording and presenting the stories of people living and working in the city, all of which resonates deeply with the themes we're going to be exploring today. So Sara, Eleanor, thank you so much for joining us in Library Land, which I know is equally dear to your own hearts. Your recent work, it beautifully blends past with present, fact with fiction, illuminating lost and found stories alike. Can you share with us how important are libraries to that creative process?
I think, libraries and archives have always been a really crucial part of my kind of creative thought process, I guess. And it started really young, when I was about 7. Went to Somerset House with my dad one day, went in the school holidays, and looked through all the big record books and was completely enthralled and didn't want to leave. So we stayed all day. And I think it was probably that day that set me on this path of kind of looking at history and, sort of society through a very kind of quite a personal lens and using it as a doorway to kind of explore that. So The Tin Can was about my traveller family, and it was using lots of different archives, sound archives, photography, lots of interviews and things like that as well. Connective Tissue is the archives were so much part of that book, but they're actually in the narrative. So I was kind of a little bit scared, I guess, at first of writing about being in archives and libraries as part of the book. But it was something that I had to, it's a fictional character that does this, but she's based on me. She sort of shares my family history, so she's like a fictional cousin that goes off to find out the history of her grandmother. So she's in the archives in Berlin. And I was wary, because I think when I was in my mid-20s and I was studying writing in Glasgow, and we went to see, it was 2006, we went to see the Da Vinci Code, the movie, all the groups of students together, and there was a line where Tom Hanks kind of really dramatically says, "I have to get to a library fast." and so I had to be really, I was just always aware of that. I didn't want to have that effect, so I kind of leaned into the physical experience of being in an archive and working with very fragile old documents that were sort of coming apart almost, and I was inhaling the fibres of these papers. But they were historically incredibly, horrifically powerful fatal documents. So it was just that sensation of being there with those things and what that smelled like, what it felt like on my fingers. So I tried to go that way rather than with the suspense route.
That's amazing. It's clearly it's visceral as much as intellectual, that experience, and really a lifelong love. And I know that people will be able to see behind us that libraries and archives really are integral to your family story as well. And I think what also comes across there is how the personal and the professional unite in such a unique way within this space. Sara, does that echo your own story with libraries and archives?
Yeah, I'm coming from a different direction, perhaps, in that it's not based on my experience, largely what I write is not based on my experience. When I go to the archive, for me, a really good historical novel is a time machine. And it will take you back to where you came from and take you back to places that you don't know that you came from, because the past is infinitely surprising. And so when I go into the archive in particular, I'm looking for those sort of details that bring it to life. And there is something really magic about opening up one of those dusty old boxes that haven't been opened for 100 years, 200 years sometimes. And most of it is boring. So you're going through and you're like, oh, this is like how I get home. I wish I had a sandwich, just one little sandwich in, all of those things. And then suddenly you're reading something and it's as if that person is next to you telling you their story and the thing that struck them that particular day. And it might be that they are missing their mother, or they saw an elephant for the first time, or it could be that they know something and they don't know what to do with that information. And that is like just reaching out over time. It's like holding hands with a ghost. And so very often those points that you make me really passionate about telling a particular story, because I know I can touch that one of your bands. So it's really vital to what I do as well. And I also do work in artifact stores. So these are really important too, and all kinds of weird. One week I insisted we live without electricity as a basement. Or, we'll only seasonal food, or we'll try and see what's actually where bodies day on day. And just try it for a few days. And very often you learn quite a lot. And then when you go back to the archive and read other people's experiences, you understand why they're fainting away food, or why they just can't face dinner, or why it produce. So it's a very visceral experience too. It's imaginatively visceral to connect to the people that came before.
That's incredible. And of course, so many of us have already read and loved your work, both of your works. And I'm so struck by, using what's in collections. It's not histories that we have grown up being told. It's not histories that we think we know. Even touching on this, what women in particular, what they're wearing, what they're eating, what they're feeling. And so much of your work, I think, explores and it really exposes these intersections that readers might not otherwise realise even exist. Does it feel like these stories then, they don't seem to be absent from our collections, they're present but under-acknowledged, unacknowledged? How do we raise them to the light?
Yeah, I was thinking about this. I think it's really often when I think I'm going to put two things together and I think, oh, that's quite unusual. But so you have something you think is quite niche, and then once you start talking to people and going into archives and doing some research, you realise that there are other people there on the same wavelength, but you've kind of got to have those conversations going on first in order for these things to come to light. So, I mean, an example, recently I met somebody who was also a grandson of a Holocaust survivor, and his grandmother had ended up also in Elgin, and I had no idea about this. And so it's really likely that at some point these two women, my grandmother and his grandmother, would have met. Whether they'd have actually had that conversation about their background, I don't know, because both at the time were not very openly talking about their Jewish heritage or background. And I think it's that thing you have to have some bravery sometimes and a bit of safety to have certain conversations. And even in my own life, like going back, I had Jewish friends when I was a teenager and a Jewish history teacher. The Holocaust still felt like a subject I couldn't broach. So I never spoke to them about my family history. And I think, so the connective tissue was a way to have that conversation, finally, and kind of open that up a bit and start to look into it.
That's so beautiful, the way that actually, literature itself can function. It is a conversation between reader, between writer, between readers, between borrowers. Yeah, that's incredible. And of course, Sarah, you're again telling, whether it's fact, fiction and everything in between, it's conversations that we may never know for sure whether or not they happened, but the point is that they could have, like giving voice to them.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's quite a bit in the archive once you start digging. But the history, the received history, if you like, that you try to go to school, and I know a lot of people in university courses, and it's very white, it's very male. There is a sense of agreement, which is quite astonishing. Almost like, well, of course, women would get the suffrage, of course, Saviour would be abolish. These were hugely acrimonious and divisive subjects for decades and decades and decades. It took 172 years for women to get suffrage, from first being brought up in Westminster the very first time, 1747. So, I think we have this sense in history as a time that was of agreement and of majority rule, and it's not really like that at all. And among the many bits of material that I'm particularly interested in, I love writing on women because they are so missing. But then when you start to look, you can see what's happening within those gaps. I great fun the Fair Botanists writing as Sir Walter Scott's long-suffering wife, Lady Charlotte Scott, because Sir Walter was just incredibly obsessed with George IV. But when George IV was coming to visit, I thought, well, she must have been pissed off, because he spent his whole time, she was just ignored, and she was French, she was probably reasonably demanded. And I just thought, she's not going to go for this at all, so I can create kind of character around that, where the gap was. And likewise with queer history, quite often, for some of my earlier books, historical novels where I was writing about adventurous explorers, there's a great deal of naval material at the British Library. And these guys all kept journals, and all journals have been kept. But there is a kind of code, because they know they're quite likely to die. If you're on a ship in 1840, you've got, your odds of coming back, or, it's better than 50-50, but not massively better than 50-50, depending on where you're going. If you're a plant manager, your average life expectancy after you leave school in the UK in the 1840s is 16 weeks. That's 4 months. And so they know their stuff's going to be returned to their mum, or their wife, or their sister. These are the people that are still at home. And if they're writing a journal, they're certainly not writing about their late night activities or their dog, or this guy they've met that they think is hot. But it's all kind of there in between the lines. If you want to look that way, you want to posit what might be there. And I think, from my point of view, I'm very lucky I was never an academic historian, because this is absolutely what you're not supposed to do. But it is now my full-time job to look into those spaces and say, well, what probably might have been going on there. Because people are endlessly fascinating and always disagreed about things. And people had all the feelings that we have today, all the thoughts that we have today. They just maybe express them differently when people express them at all. So I look through those gaps. They're absolutely exciting thing for an novelist.
Amazing, literally reading between the lines.
Yeah.
And remembering that your characters don't know the end. I mean, it's enough for actually the writer themselves to know the ending, but of course, they're living and breathing just as we are.
It's a really important point just now. Things are so divisive and people are arguing about things as if they are absolute. Every single person in this room has 100 different views, and you know you're going to be wrong about some of them. Go on. You don't know which ones you're going to be wrong about. The people who opposed the suffrage thought they were wrong. The people who opposed the abolition of slavery thought they were right. And so it's really important to remember that you think you're right, but you might be wrong, and step into that middle. And I think today, where there are so many of these sort of very extreme arguments going on, where you either get to do right or wrong and there's nothing in between, this is not the way that progress happens. Actually, historically, progress happens because people discuss stuff.
Completely, and that's, I think, a really radical potential of the library, that we want to make sure that we're asserting. Our National Library of Scotland, Amina Shah, has spoken so eloquently about the fact that we are the last space left where people side by side in a world that's increasingly polarised, often without even realising it. That diversity of views is there in the reading room, it's there in blind people. I wonder if we're kind of sort of embracing so many different aspects of storytelling here, and I think as such superstar storytellers yourselves, it's probably been clear throughout today that our profession, we really do find ourselves increasingly having to advocate for the core of what we do and the unique role that we play in society. What are your kind of top tips for us when we're telling the story of Scotland's libraries, when we want to make those decision makers, those stakeholders realise what is gained by our presence and what they lose with our loss?
I kind of think libraries are very much like carers. I'm a carer myself, so I look after two people, my dad, who has dementia. So he's forgetting a lot of the stories that he told me about his childhood in Shetland when he was younger, and I'm now remembering those to him. So I'm kind of becoming an archive in a way. I also look after my daughter, who's a wheelchair user, and I think the problem is that we don't value, as a society, we don't value the act of caring enough. So there's this kind of chronic kind of underfunding and devaluing of everything that the library is doing. I'm kind of researching now, I'm doing a memoir about caring, and I'm looking into whales and dolphins, believe it or not, and disabled whales and dolphins who there's some evidence of certain pods where disabled wild dolphins are surviving and thriving and actually contributing culturally to the life of their pods. And in return, other cetaceans are feeding them. And actually, this is a really literal kind of way this translates to libraries. I've been working in a library in North Edinburgh for about 6 years, where kids come in for breakfast every day in the holidays. And so they're being, people come in, they're fed, they have conversation, and, they read books, and a kind of closer community grows as a result of that, and a more resilient community. So I think we have this idea that there's no payback, just there's not a financial, economic kind of payback. But actually, as a carer, I think, it's very easy to see the riches that can come from that aren't financial.
Completely, it's a question of not just value, but worth, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. And I think that's really inspiring, isn't it? But there is actually hard financial data as well, and I don't think libraries shirk about that enough. Because you're dealing with politicians, so it is about that intersection between the hard data and those individual stories, and that's where the space is to inspire. And so I strongly feel like quite often libraries don't shout out enough about benefits to the community that you can measure, be they financial, be they economic, be they emotional, and also about being cohesive. And also I've noticed recently, I visit libraries quite a lot, do library events, a number of the libraries that I've been to this year are sort of almost having a threat, and they're told they just have to keep growing. And so that they're obviously interested in the data of more and more and more people, not better and better and better experiences. And I think that's really interesting, particularly when you're in a rural community where there are a limited amount of people that can come to your library, will have access to your library just in terms of the geography of it. So I think librarians who are well able for this job need to come up with really good stats and stick with your stats, because I don't hear that enough when I go into libraries. I think there is that intersection between story and data, and I think just saying the libraries are worthwhile isn't going to do that job.
Show don't tell.
Show don't tell. Thank you, Kirsten. It was a very long way round on that argument.
You're completely right. It's interesting you say when you don't necessarily hear it when you're in the library space. I think we do. All of us are guilty of, it's like, oh, don't mind, it's just saving the world, just getting on with it. But I mean, we do, you're right, the evidence is there. Every pound that's invested in libraries, the community gets at least £7 back. And it's not just financial, it's in care, it's in community, it's in riches and everything. So we're so grateful for every visit and every resource that you use and then share through your own work for millions more readers to enjoy. I do have one question. I'm very conscious of the time because this is a short but sweet keynote. But if anybody does have any questions for Eleanor and Sara, please do kind of have them in the back of your mind. I've got one last one for you myself, which is, As library lovers, and as will be very apparent, the feeling is mutual in the room. What do you hope the libraries of the future look like? What do you need from us, want from us, to continue to create the work that you're doing?
Just at the moment.
Very specifically for
I never know which way I'm going to go next, so I can only talk about the present, but I'm obviously looking at this sort of marine biology thing, which I've never looked at before, and getting access to academic research is really difficult. It's difficult to find. If you find it, it's often behind a paywall. So in a couple of months, I'll no longer have access to the university library, and I'd love to see in the future more research available publicly in public libraries, and making that more accessible, so that, you know, because I'm into sort of citizen science, and I think it'd be great if that was part of the libraries in future.
Completely, yeah. Information for all, as is our call to action today.
The academic stuff, it's really interesting you said, I haven't thought of it. I've just written a play that's going to be on Radio 4. It's a 5-mark play at the end of June. It's called Robert Burns' Psychotherapy Cure. And it's hilarious. I have had an English voicing it, and she is a shrink. And of course, she's in Glasgow, and like she has 3 clients from Robert Burns walks in for therapy, and she thinks God just excellent got time. And when I was doing research for that, I knew already quite a bit about Burns, and particularly the way he treated women. But I discovered quite laterally that there has been a study at the University of Glasgow that they think Burns might have been clearly some kind of mental health problem, and that he might have been bipolar. And I had written the play before I managed to find that. And the reason that was is because it was academic research, and it's much more difficult to get hold of. And so then I had to go back in, and I was like, oh, you can get into little points. And so, yeah, I would say the academic stuff. Also, I think that, you know, people's brains work differently. I am a reader. I've been a reader since I was a kid. I'm an obsessive reader. That is my medium. But for some people, it's audio. For some people, it's visual. And so it's about libraries creating that multi-sensory experience that information is available digitally, information is available visually, information is available. So audio is, I think, really helpful in expanding the accessibility of everything that's, you know, actually
completely information for all in all formats, so it truly is for everyone. Does anyone have a question for Sara and Eleanor? Please don't be shy. Make the most of having these inspirational women here. We're all stunned into silence, or plotting a run to Waterstones Dundee before they close to snap up those signed copies. I'm hoping the slides have been rotating. Yes, they have. Any questions or comments? Yeah, go for it. The mic is on the move. Thank you, Alison.
Can I ask how important it is for the geographical settings to be accurate, and how much does it play into the setting and how the story plays out?
We've had a chat about this before, I think, at a previous event. For me, it's really important, and I think you said the same. And going back to, particularly when you're writing about the past, so Berlin obviously has changed enormously. The centre part of Berlin that I set the book in, some parts of it are completely unrecognisable. The street plough is nothing like the way it was before. So I used a map which is fantastic, which is online called, I think it's called histomapberlin.de, and you could go back through, you know, lots of different decades and select the street map and put the current position on, and then just sweep across, and it will show you what was there before. And you can get detail that was for me really fantastic, because I could see that opposite my grandmother's flat where she lived, and I knew that there was a sorting office, like the post office type place. I could see where the synagogues were nearby and the schools. So you know, you can kind of start to imagine what the soundscape would have been like, because you would have had maybe some bells from a nearby church, or children playing from the schoolyard, you know, smells from a factory that might have been very close, and you would never get that even just from going there now. So for me, that was a big part of building up this fabric of what the city would have been like when she was there. Yeah.
Likewise, the National Library of Scotland has fantastic web section, and Bryce ended up channel up there quite often just mapping out, where can you go and what to do. There's a sort of few lines in this terms are in place. So one of them is the invention of photography. So my latest novel is set in the world of very early photography, and your research really changes once there's photography, because you can use that together with a map to have really accurate ideas from about 1849. What was going on within streetscapes. But also, more generally, I wrote up called Where Are the Women? And Where Are the Women remaps Scotland according to women's history. So I've taken out everything that was named after a guy, Fife becomes a kingdom, there's an old lady of boy, not an old man boy, and there are 1,600 women who are commemorated in this book over the whole of the landscape in Scotland. And what I discovered when I was doing the research for that is that your opportunities are very often defined by your physical space. So what is available to you? So in Dundee, for example, there were lots of working class female poets because they can self-publish, and there were enough working class women in Dundee who had money to buy their publications, and therefore there was a community of them that kind of sprung up. In Edinburgh, you've got opera singers, you've got music hall stars in Glasgow, and that's because those are the same set of skills. So it's about what's available around you. So the built environment is really, really important, and right through history as to what somebody with a certain level of skill will be able to go on and do, what can they actually achieve. And I hadn't realised that until I started to write Where Are the Women, and I was like, why are there all these painters here, or at least, why is there a big, sort of nest, if you like, of women who are doing arts? And it's because the classical school art starts taking in all these women. So, and then suddenly there's a burst of, female hospitals in Edinburgh. It's because Edinburgh Brigadier Young was training female doctors, and not only training female doctors, they're all white, they're all middle class, lots of them are gay, and they're not going to get married and have kids, so they donate their house to be a woman in a hospital. Because you suddenly see that, the landscape of the city is defining people's opportunities, and then they go back in and change the landscape of the city as a result of that. So place is really important to me. It's one of my favourite things to write, because it's where you step out of the television. So
Amazing, and you're adding to the heritage of Dundee's strong, inspirational women by joining us today, so thank you. I believe that's all we have time for, and I could listen to you both all day, not least because it's voices like yours that Scottish language, Scottish literature have been crying out for so long. So if you're as inspired as I am, do remember that Sara and Eleanor have been busy signing book copies at Waterstones Dundee, so head along the road to snap them up. But above all, could everyone please join me in expressing our heartfelt thanks to you for joining us here at CILIPS24.